And welcome to another edition of Rosen Sports Monday. Mark Rosen back with you. And first of all, I want to thank our sponsors. And now it's personal. Lexus of Wayzata, Lexus of Maplewood. I am now the proud leasee owner, if you want to call it that, of a new Lexus RX. This vehicle drives like a dream. It's the best vehicle I've ever had in my life. Check them out for yourself, and we'll hear from the sponsors a little bit later. Lexus of Wayzata, Lexus of Maplewood, and man, it's a dream to be able to drive one of these vehicles right now. Our special guest today, a busy man, and never is an off season for Alec Lewis of The Athletic, who is back from the Combine, the much anticipated and ballyhooed Combine in Indianapolis, where all the writers gather and hang out at one restaurant and search for stories and get the insights. Alec, thanks for joining the podcast today. And I know you just recently, I was reading your latest, I believe, your article, What I Heard About the Vikings at the Combine, Part 1, Quarterback Pursuit, J.J. McCarthy status, and cap plan. There's a lot to chew on. How are you, my friend?
I'm great, Mark. Thanks for having me. First of all, it's great to be back from Indianapolis. I was there probably 2 days too long, but there are, to your point, insights to be gathered and stories to go after. It really was a great week. I love it every year because it's, for me, an opportunity to be with people in person, and there's just no replacement for that. So pumped to be here. Whatever you got, we'll dive into it.
Do it.
And,
Well, I gotta go back in my little hot tub time machine first of all, because when we first, back when I was at WCCO TV for many, many years, we had to, and I'm not making this up, we had to secretly bring a camera into, I think it was in Indianapolis, to record something that was going on inside the Combine, because they wouldn't allow any cameras in there. It was a tightly guarded practice for a few days. And I remember we got a little video. I think the NFL wasn't real happy about it, but my Lord, how things have changed. Of course, NFL Network didn't exist at that time, and now it's wide open. So from your perspective, and having covered the NFL and obviously the Vikings in particular, what are your takeaways from attending and observing and talking to people? It seems like it's just it's quite a gathering for 3-4 days of lots of behind the scenes late night conversations.
Yeah, I wish major NFL fans could just go and experience what it is like when you're in my position, to just see it, because it, you hear NFL Combine,
right?
And the picture that your mind conjures is probably a running back sprinting 40 yards in a straight line with people tracking them in stopwatches. And I'll say this, and I probably shouldn't, because if my editor hears it, I'm not sure what he would think. But I wouldn't know how to get in Lucas Oil Stadium to watch those events. I have no idea how to do that. My week is spent in, I would call it, 7 different hotel lobbies, 7 different hotel bars, restaurants, and you have meetings set up with people. And there are other people who are text me on this day, and you try to meet up with them. And it is just constant conversation. And I'll tell you, Mark, this week in particular for me, because of the Vikings' uncertainty, especially at quarterback, I would venture to say the Vikings were probably a top 3 most interesting team and most intriguing conversation among people. I mean, you have people asking questions about Kwesi's firing. You have people asking questions about J.J. McCarthy. You have people asking questions about what they're going to do, about their cap situation, about Rob Brzezinski. So it is nonstop. It is really, like I said, enjoyable to just get to be with people in person. And it is coaches, executives, agents. You walk through a hotel lobby, you'll see Mike Vrabel over there. You'll see Drew Rosenhaus over there. You'll see, I mean, that's just what it is. And so, it is a really great opportunity to start to hear some of, I would say, the whispers, the rumors of what's going to happen in free agency and then in the draft. And so to be in it, you're grateful to get to do it. I don't take it for granted that the company pays for me to go, and I try to make the most of the opportunity while I am there.
Well, you and the other writers do spend, and broadcasters do spend, as you mentioned, a lion's share of the time in hotel lobbies, et cetera, restaurants, whatever it might be. The fans end up watching NFL Network, and we're watching these sprints and vertical leaps and everything else. What do you feel is the value to these individual measurables that the teams look at from that perspective? How much do they take away from that and go, that's my guy, or I think that's going to tilt the scales in his favor when you start looking at things? Are there decisions that are actually made based on those measurables that they haven't seen before?
I would say, if anything, it's kind of a cross-checking exercise. So
Okay.
the way I describe that is these scouts, personnel guys, coaches, they watch the film of all of these players. And then the combine is a way to verify some of the things they've seen on film. If a guy who they think is really fast on the field is really fast from a time perspective in the 40-yard dash or 3-cone or short shuttle, then it kind of validates some of what you're seeing. If a guy is fast on film and then he's not fast on the field, it probably makes you go back and reevaluate some of your priors and what you've observed. So it's so much of it is that. I'd say the other component of it is just a lot of these times, height, weight, speed, it's a box checking exercise, and then it's like an explosiveness rating. So you're trying to get a feel for how explosive are these players. And some teams value it more than others. Like that's something I think is really important. Like there are some teams, both in the old school realm and the new school realm, who really value these metrics. And then there are some teams like the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Los Angeles Rams who don't even come because they don't value it. They don't value it at all. They think like the 15-minute interview can just sway their decision making. So you have all sorts of perspective on kind of the value of it. And I think that's why you've seen over the course of time, some athletes participate, some athletes don't. And this year in particular, I'd say you've probably had less and less high-end prospects willing to do all of the drills because oftentimes that can just be held against them more than help their status. But it's interesting.
We know there's a series of things that happen, will continue to happen up until the late April draft as well. There's the pro day that every team, seemingly college, goes through, and a lot of the scouts that show up for that. So when you think of a team like the Vikings or whomever, the Vikings in particular, when they are evaluating, this goes on, from the time the college football season begins, even before that, I wonder how the balance is in terms of what they value between watching game film, watching these players in person during their games, the interview process, what you just mentioned that happens at the combine, afterwards, the pro day, and then eventually, the meetings with the pro scouting people with now Rob Brzezinski and Kevin O'Connell, when they finally sit down and make out that big board. I mean, it's an interesting balancing act. And you just mentioned, Alec Lewis, that, the teams like the Rams go, we don't really pay a lot of attention to this. So everyone each their own, I guess.
There's no question. I would say this Vikings group, specifically for this spring, I would expect their decision-making process to come down to really three buckets. The film evaluation is going to be a massive one. The overall intelligence in terms of ability to understand complex systems and apply them on the field. And then just the overall character component, how trustworthy is this guy? How committed and convicted are they to maximizing themselves? Like, those are the three buckets that I think this team is going to focus on over the next couple months. And I thought it was really interesting. Like, Rob Brzezinski, who spoke on the record for 20 minutes last Tuesday for the first time in a long time to local media, was like, oftentimes teams can trick themselves knowing they have certain needs, so they bump certain guys up the board. And our process this year is just going to be to try to be as objective as possible about who are the best players. And then when our name comes up on the clock, how can we make the best and most correct decision without any biases? And that's really like the fascinating, and the reason I love the draft is because it is this pool of bias, of random decision making. You're projecting what a 21-year-old is going to be 6 years down the road. And any human being in life, if you were to project the 21-year-old version of Mark Rosen 5 years down the road, I don't know what you would, how much confidence you'd have in what that person would be doing or become. So it is endlessly fascinating to me in that respect.
Getting back to how Alec Lewis and others and what you do for a living maneuver around the combine, in particular the restaurants, the hotel lobbies, the trust factor. How do you gauge if you're getting a line of BS from some of these guys as opposed to the trust value that you've built up? Obviously, more with the Vikings, but other teams, general managers, agents that you sit down with, that they're not blowing smoke up your butt, that you're just, you're hearing the real thing? Or is that just part of the game, that the way it's played?
No, it's it's a phenomenal question. And it's one that hopefully I will include as a lesson in my journalism class when I retire from the stress of this job 20 years down the road. But
good luck with the 20 years.
Correct. And also journalism classes being available 20 years from now. But I would say, Mark, I view it like this. So there are people you meet, whether it is agents, executives, coaches, at all different levels. And I try to understand that all of them probably, in speaking to a reporter, have a certain incentive. Mm-hmm. One of them might be to, get their name out there. One of them might be because they want a certain player and they want to frame ownership's opinion. Like there are all these incentives. So first and foremost for me, it is being mindful of what those incentives might be and being very objective about how to manage that. The other thing that I would say in terms of trust and ensuring that the information I'm getting is correct is evaluating that person's information over time. So like if I speak to someone over a span of 3 years, how often are they telling me the right thing? So I'm always evaluating that. And then B, cross-checking information, just like teams do on prospects. For me, it is if I hear something from one side, what is it the other side's opinion? And then what is the third party opinion? What is the league opinion? So it is this constant evaluation from my seat of who am I listening to? How long have I known them? What is their incentive? And managing those dynamics. And I'd say that's the part of the job that is, I joke about the journalism class thing. That's something very hard to learn in a classroom setting. It's something, since I covered the Kansas City Royals, when I first got out of college in 2019, you learn year after year, you improve year after year, and you understand more year after year about all of these dynamics. And I wouldn't call it the most fun part of the job. I think for me, the most fun part is when I get to write a feature on a player who's easy to root for. But it is something that I take pride in doing the right way because, again, there are so many incentives and everyone does have a role in trying to frame the narrative. And so you just have to be very cognizant that you're just steering on the direct path that holds people accountable and gives fans the most direct and honest coverage, I would say. That's like my North Star.
Again, we're talking to Alec Lewis from The Athletic, and let's focus in on the Vikings situation, the management. We all know Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah was, shockingly to a lot of people, was let go, fired. Rob Brzezinski's taken over a role right now. We're not clear if it's going to lead to a GM potential or he's going to maintain what he does best, and that's being the salary capologist, et cetera, et cetera. But did you notice any change in his not demeanor? Rob's always the same guy, but in terms of his responsibility, and what do you think the ultimate end game is for Rob Brzezinski as he goes forward and the ownership goes forward with this team?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because Rob Brzezinski, you know this, Mark, people describe him as cap wizard, cap expert. And I think oftentimes, and that is true, but it in many ways, that description of him over the course of 2 decades, to me, leaves out perhaps his most important attribute, which is being a connector with the coaching staff, a connector with the scouting department, and a connector with agents. I mean, this guy has been the primary negotiator for this team for 20 plus years. And you could talk to Dante Culpepper's agent. You could talk to Kirk Cousins' agent. You could talk to Drew Rosenhaus, and they will have story upon story to tell you about working with and negotiating against Rob Brzezinski. And so when you ask about his role right now and his end game moving forward, last week, Rob Brzezinski was doing what he's always done,
Yeah.
which is meet with agents and,
Right.
and facilitate conversation with the coaching staff and personnel staff. That will continue. And I think for him in the next 2 months, which is what he's solely focused on right now, it is just to continue to bring together those two critical sides of the organization. And that was part of the reason why Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was fired, is there was just in many ways a fracturing of synergy among those two, between those two departments. So Rob Brzezinski's role and the job that he views it right now is, can I bring these two sides together and make good decisions? And then in the long haul, I think we'll see what happens. I mean, you will get a lot of people who will say, he's not a personnel guy. They need a personnel guy. Well, I'd say that job is a general manager. It is not a general evaluator. You need to be able to manage people. And because he has the respect factor internally, I do think it gives him a chance to get the job long term. And then maybe you add personnel support around that. We'll see what happens. But I would just say, regardless, there is such a healthy level of respect for Rob among all aspects of the organization and the league. Like, I had a prominent agent, guy who's worked with every team for 30 years, say to me, he's one of the top 5 people I've ever worked with in the NFL and negotiated against. And that, for me,
it's quite a compliment.
Again, it's a massive compliment. And when you show yourself like that over the span of 30 years, I think like that level of respect won't fade, regardless of what happens over the next 2 months.
Alec, how did you read Mark Wilf's presence at the Combine? From our understanding, it's not something he normally attends. How active was he last week? And was it more just like, hey, kick the tires, I want to continue to see how this thing is evolving? Or if you also like, we got to get things right, and I want to make sure that I'm hands-on from the get-go here?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, I think the day he got there might have been Wednesday or Thursday, and I was walking around the lobby of the JW Marriott, and in walks Mark Wilf. I'm like, oh my goodness, I didn't know Mark. He's got headphones on. He looked all business. It was pretty funny. But yeah, I frankly, Mark, it's a little still kind of murky for me of why he was there and what the actual intent was. But I'd say it did signal to me 2 things. It signaled to me that he's very invested in making sure they get the leadership structure right over the next 4 months, and he's very invested in making sound decisions that don't hamstring this team in the present and future. And so that's really what that meant to me. But yeah, I have not seen him there at the Combine before. I have seen his kids there before, so I'm sure over the course of the next couple of weeks, further conversations that I have will probably be more revealing of what why he was there. But like, you get some people, maybe they were interviewing GM candidates. It's my understanding that they are just not going to broach that process until after the draft. So really the beginning of May.
Head coach Kevin O'Connell also made himself available to the local media. I don't think he had a sit-down national interview with any of the press, but how did you interpret KOC's sort of input and how much it's going to change now with Kwesi not there, and his involvement to the point where, even though he's got a pro scouting department, you got a college scouting department, that Kevin's even going to be more involved in ultimately the decision making when it comes to not just free agency, but obviously the draft here in April.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this in the past, but I think Kevin O'Connell over the course of the last couple of years has already had a major role in personnel and in evaluation, specifically when it comes to the quarterback position. I mean, the idea that he would sit idly and they would hand him a quarterback without major input, I think just isn't accurate to the nature of how things worked internally. But there's no question. I mean, he will be a primary driver and decision maker on all offensive personnel. I mean, if they are to need a new running back, I imagine his voice is going to matter heavily there. I mean, receiver position and what happens, that's really going to matter. And they've done a lot with their offensive staff for the 2026 season that I'm going to dig into, obviously, for a story on Tuesday. But I think that stuff is important. I think the run game focus is going to be pretty important, and they've talked about it year after year, and proving it, validating it is going to be critical. But yeah, Kevin O'Connell I mean, he's 4 years in now. He's made a bunch of decisions. He's had a ton of success. I mean, when they've had a starting quarterback throughout the duration of an entire year that hasn't gotten hurt and that has been experienced, they have won a lot of games. So seeing if they can get back on that track in 2026, and seeing what that would do for just the faith and confidence, even to, pushing even further for Kevin O'Connell would be pretty interesting.
Oh, the cap slashing has already begun. We know the Vikings are over the cap. I don't know, some 30 million, whatever it might be right now, depending on what's going on. Aaron Jones will no longer be with this football team. We all love Aaron Jones as a human being and as a running back who's more than paid his dues. But it's time. They got to move on from him. And it sounds as if Javon Hargrave is also going to be gone. So how do you interpret those two moves as far as the pieces that are going to now lead to other bigger and better things?
Yeah, I mean, the Javon Hargrave one seemed pretty inevitable, I would say, just given the 2025 season. And there were some flashes at times, but it just didn't ever feel like the fit with Brian Flores' system was as, I would say, just perfect as they wanted it to be. So that one was not surprising. The Aaron Jones situation was interesting because of a couple factors. The first you already mentioned, Mark. I mean, the guy, and you know this because you've been around, like he is as respected of an NFL player as you're going to find, and as just special of a human being. And while results matter in this league and these things are important, like, to think about what locker room leadership and chemistry does for teams also is absolutely critical. So there's also with Aaron Jones, he was a reliable pass protector. He could catch out of the backfield, and finding a 3-down guy with that type of skill set is not the easiest, situation in the world. But his cap number was around $14 million, which was near the top 3 in all running backs. His production was nowhere near that level. So unless he was open to a major pay cut, this was probably going to be likely. But I texted somebody this morning. I mean, that really means you're looking for a quarterback and a running back. I mean, these are two absolutely critical components of NFL offenses thriving and succeeding. So,
correct me if I'm wrong. We're here in early March. Don't the Vikings have this 2 running backs on their roster right now, technically?
Yeah, I mean, and Jordan Mason.
It doesn't matter, but right.
I mean, Jordan Mason is I will say, like, I think he is a great runner of the football. I think he is still underrated, but he struggled mightily as a pass protector, and he isn't the best catcher of the football. So when you compound that need also with the cap situation, it presents a pretty complex circumstance in terms of trying to find a running back among everything else. And so you're also going to be looking at what happens with Jonathan Allen, what happens with Ryan Kelly. Is TJ Hawkinson going to be willing to take the amount of pay cut that the Vikings want him to take? Right. And if not, then what happens at tight end? I mean, the amount of decisions that this team has to make over the next week and 2 weeks is massive. And I don't expect there to be a big free agent splurge like last year with a bunch of big names, but I do expect there to be a flurry of activity because of the cap room they need to create and because of the amount of talent they need to bring in. Yeah,
they got a full plate, no doubt about it, but that's the way the NFL rules and rolls. As we know, one team can go like the New England Patriots. They can go from the bottom of the barrel to a Super Bowl in no time, so it can happen. Let's take a quick break. We'll talk about the elephant in the room. Oh, yeah, the quarterback position for the Minnesota Vikings. We're talking with Alec Lewis of the Athletic. Stay with us here on Rosen Sports Monday. Hey, Rosie here for Lexus of Wayzata and Lexus of Maplewood. If you're in the market for a new luxury vehicle, look no further than my good friend Charlie Swanson at Lexus. Whether you're on the west or the east side of the Twin Cities, they have got you covered with 2 great locations, Lexus of Wayzata and Lexus of Maplewood. Check out the all-new Lexus TX, a spacious SUV with 3 rows of seating and plenty of room for all your gear. Head over to lexusofwayzata.com or lexusofmaplewood.com for details and to find your next ride today. Back with Alec Lewis, talking cap and the usual stuff that happens this time of year. Well, Kenneth Walker's available, isn't he? That running back from Seattle. That would have cost about $40 million. Other than that.
I just saw that as we're speaking, David Montgomery was traded to the Houston Texans.
Oh, he was? Okay.
Yeah.
Good breaking news.
He was a guy that it seemed like really wanted out for a fifth-round pick. He was a guy who wanted out of Detroit. I can't imagine Detroit would have been very willing to trade him within the division, even though the Vikings have been a great partner for them over the last few years.
Interesting.
But, yeah, so the running back, you mentioned Kenneth Walker. You're talking at the high end, it's guys like Travis Etienne. At the lower end, it's probably a guy like Kenneth Gainwell, and then there are some guys in the middle there. So there are some options, and the draft is also an option there.
Well, the draft is. I mean, obviously they have to fill some spots in that running back department without having an Aaron Jones. And you mentioned some of the limitations that Jordan Mason has, so that's got to be a pretty high priority as well. Knowing how the running game now is seemingly flourishing again in the NFL, and the importance of it, not just a guy can sling it 40 times a game. So that's a huge part of what the Vikings have to do and address.
No question. And I mean, like, I've had, it's funny, Mark, you know me, I'm a young guy. So like and I love data and I love analytics and I love numbers, but I feel like I'm like an old school 55, 7-year-old football offensive line coach with how I think about the run game, because I think it makes everything so much easier.
Mm-hmm.
It makes the quarterback's job easier. It makes the offensive. It's such a it's a multiplier for what it can do for a football team when you have a really good run game. And though the running back position, in the eyes of a lot of people, I guess, has been devalued or what have you over the last 5 years, like when you have a guy at that position, it is such just a beneficial thing for your team. So, a lot of Vikings fans I've heard, they want Jeremiah Love, the electric draft running back out of Notre Dame.
Right.
He's not going to be there at number 18.
Nope.
So the Vikings are going to need to find a solution one way or another, and it's going to be telling to see where they land with that.
Remind the fans about the Vikings draft capital that they have, because my understanding, they have all their draft picks, right? I mean, you mentioned they don't draft till 18th, which I guess in theory cost them by winning all those games late in the season, but nevertheless, they own all of their draft picks right now.
Yes, they have. I would not all of the original draft picks, but they should have at least 9 when you factor in a third-round compensatory pick from Sam Darnold leaving. So, yeah, they are loaded from a draft perspective. And you talk to people around the league, this draft is not the most talented ever, I would say. Like, especially at the top end, you've got like 5 or so guys who are really intriguing. Then you've got a lot of starting caliber players. And then the back-end depth is not phenomenal. But you know this just as well as I do, Mark. Like, regardless of whatever the talent level is in a draft, this Vikings team, to win consistently moving forward, must improve their hit rate in the draft. And Rob Brzezinski talked Tuesday about, needing to build this thing from a draft, develop, and retain standpoint. And so there's just no ifs, ands, or buts around the importance of this phase of the team when we get into late April.
Well, look no further than the Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks. I mean, they've hit on just about every one of their draft picks, and kudos to that front office for doing that. But sometimes it's luck, sometimes it's just really extra skill. But the Vikings are not in a position right now where they can swing and miss anymore. That's for sure. Okay, the quarterback drama. Where do we even start? I mean, to me. To me, it's always the conversation, because I get asked, like you do, 1,000 times, who are the Vikings going to bring in? And we can the names are all out there, from Geno Smith to Derek Carr to Mac Jones, Carson Wentz, Anthony Richardson, Kyler Murray, and I keep talking. Well, let's talk more about the guy that they drafted to be their franchise quarterback, who is now entering the most crucial year of his young career. That's J.J. McCarthy. To be part of that group that included Jaden Daniels, Drake May, Bo Nix. We know the people that he was drafted with that class. Are we concentrating a little bit on the wrong part of it? Because isn't it truly up to J.J. McCarthy to be the guy? I mean, not just for next year. I mean, this is not a stopgap season for him. He's got to kind of make or break it. I mean, that's the kind of way I look at it, but especially staying healthy.
Yeah, I mean, this is you can't even overstate the importance of this time period for him. And he is out in California and working with John Beck, former NFL quarterback, who's one of the premier quarterback developers in the industry right now, with a company called 3D QB that has worked with, I mean, Dak Prescott, Jared Goff, ton of guys. So, like, the focus for him right now and being dialed in with that is as crucial as anything. I mean, I wrote this, Mark, for Monday, but in the absolute best case scenario for the Vikings organization, he returns vastly improved. And that is, to your point, availability, that is on the field, and that is consistency off the field. I mean, it is all of those buckets that are crucial for him to be able to establish the amount of buy-in that you would want a young number 10 pick to establish with an organization. So it's important to discuss him for sure, but it's also important to talk about the hurdle that it's going to be for him to improve over a 4-month span. I mean, I think that's, and I've said this so many times, and it's so hard to kind of square in my mind, and I think in people's mind. JJ McCarthy has shown such high-end traits over the span of his time in the NFL. The problem or the dynamic here that is interesting and difficult is it's probably going to take more development time for those high-end traits to become consistent day after day and on the field day after day. And you're squaring that with, does this organization right now, with Kevin O'Connell entering his 5th year, with Justin Jefferson in his prime, do they have the patience for a year or 2 or 3 of that developmental time to happen? And that is what complicates this dynamic as much as it is. I mean, that's what makes it tough. So there's no question JJ McCarthy's development is of utmost importance, and it's going to be incumbent upon him to arrive back in Minnesota and prove that he is a transformed player, and because that's what they want to see from him, and that's how far they believe he needs to go to get to a place where they have conviction week in and week out.
Unfortunately, before we all know whether J.J. McCarthy will be taking that quantum leap this season, the Vikings do have to sign, last time I looked, another quarterback. And that's to me, the quandary with how KOC approaches it, Rob Brzezinski approaches it, and more importantly, the quarterback that they're going after approaches it, saying, if I'm Carson Wentz is a little different situation. If I'm a Kyler Murray and I can make this happen with Arizona to come here to play in Minnesota, a Geno Smith, a Mac Jones, they got. How do you approach this backup role, knowing full well if JJ gets dinged up again a little bit, whatever? Kirk Cousins, are they looking for a guy that can be in a little bit different situation than the Vikings were in a year ago, when we know what the situation was with Carson Wentz and Max Brosmer, basically as the backups at the beginning of the season?
Yeah, I think part of the reason, the way I describe this, part of the reason you've heard all these names, you being you, Mark,
right,
but also all of the listeners, is because this organization wants to prevent from repeating what happened last year, where they had their sights set on Daniel Jones.
Right.
He chose Indianapolis, and then they found themselves in a complete quandary, to use your word. So the idea that they would be circling a Geno Smith, a Kyler Murray, a Derek Carr, a Kirk Cousins, a Joe Flacco, those, when you have that amount of outs, it gives yourself flexibility depending on what if the Raiders keep Geno Smith? Mm-hmm. What if the Cardinals trade Kyler Murray to the New York Jets? Then you don't have a choice with those two guys, and you have to be particular, and you have to have options beyond those two guys. So that's part of why you've heard the abundance of names that you've had. And I would say this, these names probably don't hit anybody's ear really, really well. And I think everybody, who's followed this league would understand that. But the fact of where the Vikings are is ownership wants to compete. Kevin O'Connell needs to get back to the playoffs. Justin Jefferson wants to compete. So you need to find short-term insurance for this position. And these are some of the best guys available right now. So that is kind of the realm of player that they're looking for. And I would also say this, I think this Vikings staff believes in their system with their talent. A lot of these names we've tossed out there can throw for thousands of yards, just like Carson Wentz might have been able to had he stayed healthy throughout the 2025 season. And I frankly have a hard time arguing. Like, if Geno Smith has thrown for 3,000 yards in 4 straight seasons in Kevin O'Connell's offense, I think he would probably throw for 3,000 yards
right.
and a lot of interceptions, but you live with those with some of the production too. So it's how it ends up is going to depend largely on, again, do the Raiders cut Geno? If they do, would he sign for the minimum? If he would, that's a great opportunity because it wouldn't hamstring the cap further. After that, a lot of the options become their own conversation, whether it's Kirk, whether it's Derek Carr, whether it's Kyler, that leads you down further avenues where I felt like I needed a lot of space in a story to explain all.
One name you left out is Aaron Rodgers. Anticipation is that he potentially will come back again. He could go back to Pittsburgh. Do you rule him out 100% as far as coming to Minnesota?
I wouldn't rule it out 100% because I know the amount of support that existed in the building last year for that to happen. And it's Mark, you know this, or locally, the Aaron Rodgers thing was as much mayhem as it was. And I completely understand why, but I don't think I'd expect him to be kind of the primary player there, but I still know that he and Kevin O'Connell have a really good relationship. And I know that there was a lot of support, again, internally, whether you're talking staff or players, for the Aaron Rodgers thing to happen last year. It didn't happen. But the idea this is just me as my analyst, the idea of not choosing him last year, but then choosing him this year would be kind of an interesting situation to explain.
So lay this out to the fans, Alec, Lewis. When does the league's season begin, and how quickly do you think the Vikings will move on signing one of these quarterbacks to get them in the fold? Without there's still competition out there with obviously other teams to get that person A in here to be, I'm saying the backup, but competition for J.J. McCarthy.
Yeah, so the new league year begins Wednesday the 11th. So it's about 9 days from today.
That's quick.
But I will say and this is NFL parlance, which makes me laugh, the legal tampering period, as they call it, begins Monday, March 9th. So you will start to see, a week from when we're talking right now, you will start to see a flurry of this player is intended to sign here, as if all of those conversations just happened right on Monday somehow by the grace of God. They already all know where they're signing. So that will happen a week from today. And I would expect both this week and the lead up to next Monday and next Monday to be when you start to see a lot of this activity begin, quarterback specific and elsewhere, just because these other teams are going to have to make decisions for their quarterback future that will be revelatory in terms of which guys will be available. And then this Vikings team does not want a repeat of last year. So you will see, I would be stunned if by next Wednesday or next Thursday, we don't have a pretty clear idea of what's going to happen.
I'm not going to hold you to it, but if you were a betting man right now and looking at financial aspects of it and also just the MO of the player that they potentially would bring in and what he would expect to sign with the Vikings, do you have a particular favorite or favorites that you think would be the number one landing spot here for Minnesota?
Yeah, I think Geno would be the one that I would watch. And obviously, again, there's going to be a rash reaction to that one way or another, I'm sure, from people. But he throws the football down the field aggressively. He's had success. He's played in similar systems, and he could galvanize a locker room for sure. And this past season in Las Vegas was really bad.
Right.
I think there's a feel from a lot of people in the league and in the Vikings building. I know this, that the circumstances in Las Vegas with the offensive line and the coaching staff did not help him at all. So he would be the name. I would say if Geno is kept by Las Vegas, then it becomes more of a puzzle. Kyler Murray, if he becomes available, I would expect that to force some real serious conversations internally. I'm not convinced completely that they would do that for sure, but if the right people signed off, maybe that could be the option. And then if it's not Kyler and if it's not Geno, then you're talking, I mean, again, what does Derek Carr's health look like?
Oh, my.
What is Kirk Cousins looking for? And then again, the absolute floor to me would be Joe Flacco, which would make sense probably considering he was on the Vikings radar last year.
And what's Geno Smith's contract situation right now? Is he?
So he is the easiest way I describe it that is the most understandable is he is owed $18 million right now from the Las Vegas Raiders. They have to decide on an 8-year kind of accelerator over the next week, I would say. And so if he is eventually cut by the Raiders and they decide to move on with a cheaper backup to Fernando Mendoza, then the Vikings could potentially sign Geno Smith to the minimum because the money would be paid by Las Vegas. So you're talking about getting a player that this Viking staff would like on a very minimal contract, which again, speaking to the earlier conversation we had on running back, on tight end, on center, on safety, that would allow them to use some of their resources to beef things up elsewhere. So that's the best, easiest, quickest way I know how to describe the cap minutia.
As long as I've been doing this, and I've covered the NFL for many, many years, I've never seen a league that is never out of season more than the NFL. They literally keep this going 365 a year. There's very few days, even to say nothing of weeks, where they are not in the news one way or another. There'll be a schedule announcement, and where the Vikings are playing and where they're going to be going. And obviously we got free agency, we got the draft, we got next thing you know, you're going to be down at TCO covering OTAs. I mean, it's crazy. I don't know how you feel. Well, that's not bad. It's not bad to make a living that way. But right now, I think more than ever, you young guys have a chance to just never take any time off because the Vikings and the NFL are always in season.
Yeah, it's funny. I covered baseball for 3 years.
Yeah,
part of
the
appeal. Part of the appeal of the NFL was like, there's only 17 games, and you go to practice, and there is part of that is accurate. But like my mom asked all the time after the season, do you get to rest? And usually the answer has been no, because the Vikings are perennially figuring out a quarterback every spring. So. It is relentless. My girlfriend, I think, recently was frustrated that I was spending the weekend working on a Kwesi Adofo firing aftermath, and I appreciate her malleability to the work schedule. But I this, Mark, like I it was a dream for me as a kid.
Yeah,
I don't take it for granted, and I like when you work alongside. I've told a lot of people this in Indianapolis. When you work alongside John Krasinski, Michael Russo, Aaron Gleeman, and the staff we have at The Athletic, like there is a standard where I feel as much as like what the league upholds, like there is a standard that we have at our place that I never, ever take for granted. So at some point, I'm sure when you want to have a family, then you start to ask the real questions of how much can you really continue to push on this thing. And that's why I have respect for Kevin Seifert for being able to, and Ben Gessling for doing it. But it is nonstop, and the NFL has mastered the media ecosystem. That's sure.
Kudos to The Athletic for not just you rattled off a lot of the local guys that we know quite well and their journalistic integrity, and that's a good word these days because there's not a lot of it out there in the world for lots of reasons. Not taking it away from any individual, but The Athletic has certainly found its place in the sports landscape here. So, Alec, thank you so much for spending some time with us. I know you're a busy man, and we'll see you before you know it. You know it's going to be here. Appreciate your time, Alec.
Of course, Mark. Thank you for having me, and enjoy the quarterback merry-go-round.
Yes, thanks so much.
We will see what happens. Thanks,
Alec
Mark.
Lewis of The Athletic joining us today on Rosen Sports Money. Thanks, everyone, for listening. I got a special guest coming up on Wednesday of this week. Gavin Kasem, the restaurateur extraordinaire, has a lot of great stories, a lot of great insight into what's going on with the local restaurant scene and the need for a lot of help and moving forward with a lot of things that he's involved with as well. So thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.